Hi, welcome to Funny Minds. I'm your host, Lynn B. And today we have on Robin Bartlett. And before I say anything or go anywhere, thank you for your service, Robin. It's the anniversary, 50 years of the last, what was it, the last POW that came back from Vietnam. Is that what they're celebrating? Is that exactly the way they're celebrating it?
March 29th is the National Vietnam Veterans Day, and that was the last day 50 years ago when the last troops left Vietnam and the last flight of POWs flew out of Hanoi on the same day, 29th.
And you were 22 years old, you were a platoon leader, you had 32 men under you that you deployed, you were you were in the helicopters, I understand?
I made a lot of helicopter combat assaults. That
Okay.
was what my unit, the 1st Cavalry Division, it was air mobile concept. That was the idea.
That air cav, correct?
Air cav, right.
Okay.
The 32 is the high number. Usually it was more like 24, 26, depending upon people getting sick, injured, being evacuated, etc.
Right, exactly. So my first question I wanted to ask, because I didn't see anything in your paperwork, did you enlist or were you recruited?
Well, my family was military, so I pretty
Oh,
well had to serve my obligation as an officer. My grandfather went to West Point. My father went to West Point. My brother went to West Point. I turned down an appointment to West Point. I said, no,
oh.
I have had enough of the military. 13 middle school, elementary and middle school, 4 high schools. I said, nah. But it was the height of the Vietnam War. I went through the college's ROTC program and was commissioned as an officer.
Well, that is amazing. And it's hard to believe 50 years ago. I mean, I had a number of friends that either didn't come back from Nam or did come back and they were okay. A lot of them came back, they were never okay. It was a very when I was younger, I remember it was a very hard time for this country. It was a very hard time for all of us, to go through something that we went through that was very devastating, emotionally, physically. And you went through it and you were young, 22. You were very young to be, in charge of all these men. I'm sure you yourself, how did you feel at that moment in time being so young?
Well, I went through the Ranger training program, and that was actually the best insurance program that I could have for survival in Vietnam. It toughened you up and it really made you fearless and gave you a tremendous sense of confidence. Not a lot of experience, but certainly a tremendous sense of confidence. And the smartest thing I did when I took over my platoon was to sit down with my squad leaders and platoon sergeant and say, okay, first of all, what happened to my predecessor? And then I made a point of saying, you guys are the ones that have the experience. I'm the leader, but I want to listen to you, and I want you to know that foremost in my mind is the security and welfare of my platoon.
Okay. I mean, I've talked recently because, being a senior, I belong to a senior club in my own town, and naturally there's a lot of veterans. And I do remember that, and I'm going to ask you something that you wrote about being welcomed back into America. And I seem to remember that um, the men coming back from Vietnam were not welcomed like other soldiers from other wars. Did you have that feeling or
I had a little different experience because I was a regular Army officer, and so I had orders to go on to another military assignment after
oh,
Vietnam. So and my parents actually picked me up and swiftly got me out of the area, and so I stayed within the military for another 4 years after Vietnam. And so I never really interacted with a lot of the adverse things that went on in the United States, the protests and the experiences that many of the vets that I've talked with have gone
Right.
through.
Yes, this one gentleman I was talking to a month ago, told me, he was an MP in Vietnam, but they had them do some other things too. And he also was in, every once in a while would fly in one of the copters and help and what have you. But he said when he came back, it was hard for him to get a job. People were a little bit disrespectful to him, and he felt like, I don't you look at the fact that I was working to save, a lot of you people from harm or, perpetual harm. But that's not how America looked at the vets when they came back from
No,
Vietnam.
and you're right, and the vets suffered because of the Tet Offensive of 1968. Kind of changed Americans' opinion of the war. We went
Right,
from winning the war to, hey, wait a minute, I'm not quite so sure. And then you had the My Lai incident when all the civilians were killed, and
right,
the general, the South Vietnamese general, uh, killed the Vietnamese Viet Cong soldier, supposedly, um, executed him on the spot, and so all those dramatic moments, which were publicized very dramatically in the press, I
right.
think shifted the American opinion, and unfortunately, the soldiers were following orders of their superior. So, but they were the ones who bore the brunt of America's displeasure with the war, uh, and many of them, had some very, very difficult times when they came back.
They did. And, we didn't really even consider it. I mean, it was never really labeled. Or it was never really declared that it was a war. Not to my knowledge, and I know a lot of the vets had a lot of problems with like um the different organizations, like oh, I'm trying to think of the different veteran organizations, that
VFW and
yeah, like I remember
Veterans of Foreign Wars.
we used to go down the shore every year, because my ex-husband's whole family was in World War II. And so we go to the convention, and there was one young guy who was in Vietnam, and they wouldn't even talk to him, but yet now they're welcomed into these organizations because a lot of the people from World War II are gone, so they have to
Yes.
keep their organization. So now all of a sudden they're welcoming them in into their organizations, which I'm happy. I'm very happy for that. And I'm happy that, for their recognition, but I think it was very sad to have to, being young and have to watch stuff like that was very sad for me, and for a lot of
And
other people too.
and of course, younger men coming back from war have families to raise, and uh, careers to build, and whether they're in the service or whether they're in civilian life, and they don't have time, often don't have time for those organizations. So I'm the president of the New York, New Jersey chapter of the First Cav Association. We have exactly the same problem. It's very difficult to get Afghanistan and Iraqi veterans to come to our meetings.
Oh, really? Really, they don't want to come?
Well, I think they're just too busy, and there are too many other things, too many
I
other
see.
demands on their times and their lives. I mean, if just like me, I didn't join this organization until a few years ago.
Okay,
I had a family to raise, I had kids, and
right.
I didn't have any spare time, especially on weekends.
But I'm sure you do, because I know the uncles, a few of them, they'd always be asked to go to schools or colleges or whatever and speak to the kids about the war, and they always did that. And they were very happy to do that, about World War II. I'm talking about, so do you do speaking engagements on Vietnam and
Uh,
what you went through? And
I have done that, but because of the kind of the black label that's been plastered on the Vietnam War, a lot
hmm
of educators and teachers are hesitant to bring veterans back, especially if they have a negative connotation about the war, and many of them do. They want
yeah,
somebody to talk about, more of the larger picture of the war as opposed to negative comments.
They want to stay away from the political aspect. And all
Yeah.
that.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
So let me ask you a question, Robin.
Yeah.
To be put in a situation, obviously growing up in a military family, you're around it. It's still not quite the same until you actually step foot in that theater. And to be in that theater at that age and to be in charge had to be overwhelming to an extent. To an extent, but what you did after that, you said you moved on after Vietnam. What did you do after that?
After I got out of the service,
No,
I
no,
went
no.
to
No,
After,
after you were.
oh
yeah, they
yeah. Well,
you said you got redeployed.
an officer typically serves 6 to 7 months in the field and then to a staff job. And my staff job was the division historian because I had a background in literature and I could write. So our motto of this unit was "You fight it, we write it." And we
I like that.
we would go out directed by the G3, that's the division operations officer, after a major contact and interview the soldiers who were still there and try to piece the battle back together again, draw maps, take pictures, and often our reports were the first, especially if it had been a contact at nighttime. Our reports were the very first time that people began to understand a battle. Anyway, toward the end of my tour in Vietnam, I had not received orders. And so I talked my boss into a 3-day trip to Saigon, uh, ostensibly to buy art supplies and to find out what my orders were. So on the third day, after enjoying 2 days of a lot of touring and fun and going to bars and such, I worked
Which you
my
would
way.
never think of doing.
No. I worked all the time. I went to the MACV headquarters and worked my way in, and actually went into a large gymnasium. They had basketball hoops pulled up, and on the floor of this gymnasium were low trays of punch cards. That was the computer programming of the day, Fortran computer programming. And each card was a soldier in Vietnam, arranged alphabetically. So we went down the line, A to B to BA to BAR to Bartlett Peter, Bartlett John. Okay, here you are. You're going to Seattle, Washington. I said, oh, Fort Lewis, Washington. And he said, no, this says Fort Wainwright. We actually, I said, wait a minute, I went to high school in Seattle. There's no Fort Wainwright in Seattle or even in the state of Washington. And we had to look it up in a directory. And Fort Wainwright is located in Fairbanks, Alaska.
Oh, Jesus. So you were part of F
You were going through Seattle.
I got the West Coast. That's what I asked for.
Way northwest.
Did they have a lot of igloos by that fort?
Yeah, well, it was pretty chilly, I'll tell you. I went there fortunately during the summertime, so it was only about it got up to about 65 degrees occasionally, but I saw minus 20, minus 30, minus 40.
Oh,
it was a
my
big jump
God.
because I know in Vietnam it's hot as hell.
It took a while for my blood to adjust, I'll tell you that.
I'm sure it did. And then don't they have the one time where it's day for 24 hours or something like that? Yeah, it doesn't get dark or something.
And the reverse, it's dark all the time. It gets to be kind of a twilight a little bit, ever so slightly.
People have a lot of psychological problems because of it, and
yeah,
you
have to have curtains on your windows, blackout curtains during the summertime, just to darken the room. Yeah.
Wow.
And you have to plug your car in at night, or if you don't, your car is dead. You had a battery.
I did hear that. Yes.
Battery heater, circulating water heater, and dipstick heater. If you forgot, you were in big trouble. You had to have your car towed, and cost you a couple $100 to have it thawed out.
So I guess you've never gone back on a cruise to Alaska.
I went to Winnipeg and then on up to Churchill, Canada, which is the polar bear capital of the world. That's as close as I came. That was to see the polar bears.
That is.
Hey, Robin, let me ask you: have you ever, throughout the years, for any reason, ever gone back to the Far East?
To Vietnam?
Yeah.
I'd like to go. I'm associated with a group called um, Peace Trees Vietnam. It's a nonprofit, and they're very focused on removing ordnance from various different parts of Vietnam, demining, as they call it, taking the
Okay.
mines and ordnance out of the ground, and then planting trees. So they offer
Oh,
trips
that's
to go
nice.
back and become involved in that activity. So that's kind of one of my bucket list items I'd like to do.
Yeah, that sounds.
Yeah, that
pretty
sounds very
incredible.
interesting. When I was in
Better than just a tour.
Yeah,
when I was
exactly.
in Washington, I think for me, because of the friends that I lost in Vietnam, the wall for me was kind of very intense. It was an intense thing, you know.
It is an intense thing. It was
Yeah.
for me as well. I've visited there many times, especially at night.
Mhm.
And it always, the shape of it always reminded me of the military insignia, the chevron.
Yeah.
And then, especially at night, as you walk down that path, it gets cooler, and it reminds me of being in a foxhole at nighttime. Can't help that. And I have several men on the wall, and I try to
Right.
visit them. I
Yes.
try to visit them.
Mm-hmm.
It is very daunting. I mean, I was just there a couple months ago with my wife, and we got to see a lot that, throughout the years I haven't gotten to see, but that's always one I always go back to. And when you just see the size of it, and when you really try to wrap your head around the amount of names that are on that wall, it's incredible.
It's it's very emotional. It's extremely emotional.
There's been a lot of controversy about it, but I personally think it's a good thing, especially for Vietnam veterans. It's very
Yes, it
appropriate.
is. Yes, that they're acknowledged in that they've got some kind of acknowledgement that people can go, just like what they did in New York with 9/11. People can go, they can say their prayers, they can leave things, they can look at strangers, they can look at people that they know, and it makes you feel good inside, even though there's a sadness. It makes you feel good inside that these people are recognized.
Well, they have to be remembered.
Yes, and remembered.
They
Yes.
have to be remembered.
Yeah.
Mind you of what history has. What's happened in history. It is history.
It is. It really
Can't
is.
make believe it hasn't happened. So.
Excuse me.
Now look what you did, Rob. You got her upset. Now her purple's going to drip out of her hair.
Well, my platoon sergeant is on the wall, and usually the platoon sergeant is supposed to be the most experienced man in the platoon, usually with 10 to 15 years experience, and you really depend upon him to run the platoon. My platoon sergeant was what they called an instant NCO. And he had gone through a 6-month training course and had been promoted to platoon sergeant at the end of that course. He had his 19th birthday in Vietnam.
Oh.
So he and I had about the same level of experience, just military experience.
Yeah. So
he
it was
didn't come
like
back.
babies. It was like they were just shooting off babies.
I was the second oldest man in the platoon at 22.
Wow.
There was one man who was 24.
And he was like an old fart, right?
He was the old man. That's correct.
The elder at 24.
Yeah, the elder at 24. Yeah, no, it's insane.
It was a young man's war, and they were all. I'd say 90% of them were draftees as well.
Yeah,
a couple of regular Army, but mostly draftees.
Mostly everybody was. When they got that dreaded letter, it was people trying to. Well, I don't agree with people that ran out of the country, but on the other hand, I can understand emotionally. But I don't accept it, but I understand it. But I'm sure
again,
that letter
that period of time, 68 to 69, was the height of the war, and there were more casualties during that period of time than at any other time in the war. There were more killed during that period of time than all of the rest of the time in Vietnam. So that helped to turn the tide and made young men very, very nervous about the fact that they wouldn't survive the tour.
Mhm.
Exactly. Exactly. That's like,
I was kind of
D-Day.
worried about that myself.
Yeah, I'm sure you were. I'm sure you said
It'd
you're
be insane if you didn't. I mean,
really.
it's human nature. And you look
What,
throughout history, all
when I
wars,
came into
battles
my
were.
battalion, I met with the S1, who was the personnel officer, and he said to me, "Well, I see that you have had some experience as the S1, as a battalion adjutant with the 82nd Airborne Division." And I said, "Yes, and I'd like that job, when it's my time to come out of the field." And he says, "Well, we'll think about it if you survive."
Oh my God. That's
Well,
not the word you want to
survival
hear.
rate, survival rate of platoon leaders was less than 90 days.
Whoa. But I guess, the mentality of anybody going over there, knowing what they would hear, what they would see, anybody going over there basically would have probably felt that way. And families probably felt that way too,
For sure.
when they were
Yep.
sending their son off, I'm probably never going to see him again,
My
and that's,
brother preceded me in Vietnam. He was an artillery officer and he was severely wounded and came back, and he completed his military career, but he never really recovered both mentally and physically. It just affected him
oh
tremendously.
yeah. No,
Well,
I know a lot of people that came back, and even from Afghanistan and everything. I mean,
Sure.
uh, those military men too have gone through an awful lot, and they suffered an awful lot, and they come back here, and they need a lot of help. They really do. And
It's the
and
same thing, with policemen and firefighters and
yes,
EMS, even I guess emergency room physicians as well.
mhm.
They
yes.
they have to steel themselves against those kind of traumatic experiences.
And you work with people that have the PTSD. You
No, not
or
really,
no?
not really. No, I'm just simply saying that's what I had to do because I had men who were killed,
Mhm.
and when they were killed, it was my responsibility as the officer to fill out what was called a death card, put down the coordinates where as close as possible where they died, and I would put that card on their boot with one of their dog tags, and I have to go through their pockets, make sure there wasn't anything in the pockets that shouldn't be there.
Uh-huh.
Return any material back to the headquarters. My men didn't want to do that. I guess maybe it was superstition, but I
Mm-hmm.
was the one who had to do it. And then
Mhm.
we didn't have body bags; we had ponchos. So we wrapped them in ponchos. I wrapped them in ponchos, and you couldn't have the poncho flapping around when the helicopter came in to pick up the dead or the wounded. So I carried a ball of twine with me, and I would tie it off around the head and waist and feet so that the poncho wouldn't flop around. And
Oh,
then
right.
Right, yeah.
when that was a very hard thing to do, very, very hard thing to
Couldn't
do. That
imagine.
was
I
probably
could
the
not, yeah.
hardest job in
I
my
could not
book.
imagine doing that.
In my
I
book, I call that chapter "My First Worst Day in Vietnam." That's when I had to take care of the very first man who was KIA, killed in action.
Well, Robin, talk about your book.
Well, it took me the better part of 10 years to write it. And then I went out to a number of friends the military friends all said, "Oh, this is wonderful. Go ahead and publish it." And then I had a couple of women who were good friends from the publishing field. And they said, "Oh, you only want to sell this to military types, right?" And I said, "No, I want this to appeal to general readers too." And they said, "Well, you better put more emotion in it. You get personal feelings. It's not coming through, and you got to demilitarize it. Take all these abbreviations out." So I spent another 2 years
oh gee.
doing that, and I remembered that my mother had saved every letter that I wrote home, and they were in
Oh.
this great big envelope, and she left them in the envelopes, so they were all date stamped.
Mhm.
And I put them in order, and I reread every letter, and then I reached in and I would grab snippets of my letters and put them into appropriate chapters. So you could read the story that I wrote, and then you could read what I wrote home about.
Right.
And
Oh, that's
sometimes,
very interesting.
With a
sometimes they
pseudo
weren't quite
timeline.
the same story.
Right. And the name of your book?
Is
Tell our
Vietnam
audience.
combat, firefights, and writing history. So that brings
Okay.
in that second part that I was talking about earlier, the history part.
Okay.
So how do you feel? I mean, obviously these days PTSD is very well known and talked about, and it's everywhere. And obviously back then, mental health was not
Dealt
a
with.
thought. I mean,
Yeah.
it wasn't even a factor. I mean, how do you feel about what you see these days as far as what the veterans are getting as far as assistance or help? Or do
Well,
you
the VA
think?
is starting. The VA is starting to make some inroads there, both in terms of PTSD and toxic burning. And there was a lot more toxic burning in Afghanistan and Iraq than there was in Vietnam. The only toxic burning we had in Vietnam was taking care of the latrine duty, where you poured fuel oil into these. You cut a 55-gallon drum in half, and that was underneath the latrine, and you would pull it out and put a fresh can in and pour in diesel fuel and burn it. So that
And
was the job of the FNG, the effing new guy, the effing new
That's
guy.
right.
That's funny.
Well, how big of a factor? I mean, you talk about toxins and what you dealt with, and non was Agent Orange. How big of a factor was that? I mean, obviously it's a serious factor, but how widespread was it?
It was serious, and it was widespread. My division was forbidden to drink water from streams or even to purify water from streams because of Agent Orange poisoning. And I walked through a number of areas that were defoliated. For the most part, however, our area of operation was either in the mountainous areas near the Laotian border, which was a free fire zone, or out in the open area near the Gulf of Tonkin. And that was that was an open area. It didn't have any foliage, and you couldn't defoliate the jungle. So for the most part, I avoided Agent Orange.
Oh, okay. Well, that was good of you. That was very smart on your part.
You're fortunate.
Yeah, you're very fortunate.
Yeah, I think the soldiers who suffered the most were the ones who dispensed it, and were had to go through area of operations that were defoliated, and you could tell them immediately when you reached one of those areas. It was like all the leaves had fallen off the trees. It was like fall. It was fall.
Obvious.
There were no leaves on the trees, and everything was brown and dead. And the dust was all over the ground. It got all over your boots. You slept in it. I mean, if you parked in it, that's where you slept. Yeah.
Yeah.
Fortunately, I only really had that happen to me a couple of times.
Okay. So when you got out of the service, what did you do then? You spent another 4 years.
Yep.
Freezing. You went from one extreme to the other.
Well, I was only in Alaska 2 years, and then they shipped me back down to Fort Benning, Georgia, which was the infantry school.
Oh,
and
I was at Fort Benning.
And now called Fort Moore, by the way. They're renaming it. And I had a wonderful assignment as an operations officer. And my group, I was with the leadership department, which is like the management department of a college. Our job, we were given a special assignment to develop a course of instruction, which was implemented Army-wide. And we brought in one officer and one NCO from every military unit in the world. And we trained the trainers with a course of instruction called Leadership for Professionals. And so that kind of got me into the publishing field. We did a book of readings. We didn't have PowerPoint. We had overhead transparencies, right? But that set me on the course of being interested in publishing. And I went ultimately most of my civilian career was in publishing, in working with a number of different publishing companies, mostly in sales and marketing.
That's a vast difference from being in a helicopter. Yes,
it was.
But that's a fantastic path that you took.
Wow.
This is only my personal curiosity. Kind of in your lifetime, any movie that you've ever seen made in regards to Vietnam, which one was your favorite, if you even have one? Or was there one that you viewed more realistic than anything else? Or was it all just sensationalized and not even close?
Well, that's a very difficult question. I've seen them all, I guess. And you always pick apart the little things. You notice so many little things, whether what they're carrying, what they're wearing, and you know, if they had nice clean uniforms, you immediately rejected it because I mean,
That's not possible.
when I was in the field, I'd wear the same clothes for 4 weeks at a time. You wouldn't get clean clothes.
Oh, wow.
And you would be dirty. Let me tell you, very, very dirty. You know, I think Full Metal Jacket had a high degree of authenticity to it. Even to some extent, Forrest Gump. One of the reviewers of my book is Dale Dye, who was a Marine captain, and his civilian career was to work with a number of producers and directors, and he would take the cast on a 2-week trip into the boonies and really teach them how to be soldiers. And he worked on a number of those Vietnam. He's got credits on a number of those Vietnam movies, and so that was his major goal.
Coach them and try and give them a sense of what it was really like and how people reacted.
Exactly. Yeah.
That's incredible. Full Metal Jacket. You know, I did. You know, what I thought was
I watched
interesting
it, but I
about
don't
that movie
remember it.
was the boot camp aspect of it and the mental.
Well, that was Marines.
Aspect.
That was Marines, so it was a little bit different. A lot depended upon where you got your training and what type of training it was. My training was, airborne training, which was paratrooper training, and then followed by infantry officer basic training. And I went through with the graduating West Point class that went infantry. So they were very, very gung-ho. And the ROTC guys were kind of ostracized. The ring knockers, as we called them, took care of themselves. Well, they all had that big ring on their hands. So, but as I mentioned before, Ranger School was the insurance policy for Vietnam, and it treated everyone the same. It tested you to the point of total exhaustion. They made you go to the point of total exhaustion and hunger because you got one meal a day. That was it. I lost about 25 pounds in Ranger School. And then when you reached that point, that's when you became the leader, when you were totally exhausted and hungry. And if you made your objective, you got the next meal. If you failed to get to your objective, you didn't eat.
So like a puppy, you were food driven. Sit for your treat. But hey, listen, when you're in that situation and you're hungry, obviously that's serious.
There was a lot of motivation.
A lot of the SEAL training, a
lot of motivation.
Level they put the SEALs through.
Oh yeah.
Of exhaustion and sleep deprivation.
Well, I would say I would not give a nod to my SEAL brothers that training is the most arduous training there is available in the military. There is no more challenging. You can say Green Berets and Rangers and all the rest of it. SEAL training is the hardest.
Yeah.
It looks it.
Yeah.
We had a couple of SEALs go through the Ranger course with us, and it was a piece of cake for them in terms of the physical. In terms of the physical part, it was a piece of cake, and we depended on them because they were so strong. Often we would start lagging behind, and they'd pick our rifles up. I have short legs, so on the forced marches, I would find it very hard to keep up. And this one SEAL said, "Here, grab onto my pack frame," and he literally hauled me along and kept me up. I would have fallen behind. Yeah, he was that strong.
That's amazing.
And whenever we, of course, we ran everywhere, and we would start at 5 o'clock in the morning with a 5-mile run. and it would rain and there'd be puddles. And whenever these two seals saw puddles or water, or if we ran past a stream, they'd make the sound of a seal, that sound. And the drill sergeants they made us go jump in the puddles. Everyone had to go jump in the puddles. So we told them to cool it on the seal sounds.
That's funny. That's really
You never hear
funny.
that sound again the rest of your life.
Yeah,
Always snap you back to that moment.
Never forget it. Yeah.
Nope.
Oh God, that's really funny. Wow. So now what are you doing with yourself? That you've written your book and you're part of different organizations.
People think that writing the book is the hard part. It is not. The
No,
hard
you're right.
part
It's
is
not.
it's marketing and promoting the book. And I've been very, very fortunate to. I just got notice that I'm going to be interviewed by my local newspaper, the
Oh,
Bergen
good.
Record, and they're owned by USA Today. So I've got my fingers crossed that there's a possibility there that it could be an even larger exposure. I've been on
Great.
a number of military podcasts. The most popular one is called Echoes of the Vietnam War, and has a very large circulation. And so I'm working my book, and I've got a very robust website where people can visit, and I've developed a couple of nice little short 5-minute videos that they can watch on various different aspects of firefights and helicopter combat assaults. And
So
I've got my reviews up.
Let the audience know what that website is.
www.robinbartlettauthor.com.
Okay.
robinbartlettauthor.com.
robinbartlettauthor.com.
Yes.
That's right. If you just Google Robin Bartlett, it'll come up because
it'll come up.
People, yeah, people have been working it, and they can get an autographed copy with free shipping. So I'm actually undercutting Amazon. You get a better deal from me than you get from Amazon.
There you go. That's wonderful. Okay.
Well, I wanted to make the book accessible to vets if they wanted a copy.
Well, I think that's very important, and all of the listeners, I'll let you know when the show airs, and you can send it out, or advise a lot of people, and they can come and see you on our show. But our time is come to an end.
Okay.
And I so appreciate you making the time. Again, this is Funny Minds, and we interviewed Robin Bartlett today, who was a wonderful man and is alive, and thank God, and went through Vietnam and brought back a lot of memories for us to talk about. And please look up his book, and please buy his book, because anybody who is younger really needs to understand what Vietnam was all about and what the military went through that was over there. So I would highly advise anybody watching our show to really buy the book, understand it, and send little things to Robert, because he's gonna love to hear from you. Robin, I'm sorry. He's gonna love to hear from you.
And it's not all combat. I've got some funny things in there that happen too. So it's a balanced presentation too.
Okay,
I have
so you're a number
comedic. Yeah, because there's some funny things.
Some personal stories and funny moments.
Okay. All right, that's good. That sounds good.
That's good.
I had a number of kind of unusual things that happened to me, and each one of those stories has become a chapter in the book. So I
Again,
think
Robin, I thank you for being on. I thank you for your service. I thank you for being with us today, and I thank our listeners.
I'll leave you with one last thing, and that is Vietnam veterans are starting to walk in the boots of their Korean brothers and the World War II veterans.
Right.
And if you really want to have an impact on Vietnam veterans, try practicing the words "welcome home." There's nothing wrong with "thank you for your service."
Yes.
But if you say "welcome home" to a Vietnam vet, you will be amazed at the reaction.
Okay, I will remember that. I will definitely remember that.
Those are good words.
Thank you so much for saying that.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you, Robin.
Thank everybody for being with us today. And if you go on funnyminds.com, you can see our website and see we have a store. We sell silly things that say Funny Minds. Also, there are two organizations that we're very involved with, and that's Women's Breast Cancer and St. Jude's Children's Hospital. So there's a big purple button there, and we'd appreciate it if people would donate to those two organizations. They're very, very important to us, and they're very important to a lot of people in this country. And I thank all of you for being with us and love you. And don't forget to be happy, be safe, smile, but always remember that laughter is the best medicine. So with that,
It
I'm going to
is.
say goodbye and thank you.
Thank you.
again, Robin. Thanks
Thank
so
you
much.
for
And
having
take care, Robin.